The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it has been written through the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and ascertained from them the time of the star's appearance. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word, that I too may go and do him homage." After their audience with the king, they set out. And behold, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and on entering the house they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. And then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. The Gospel of the Lord. The Feast of the Epiphany is celebrated very big in the Eastern Christian traditions. For them, it's their primary celebration, whereas for us, Christmas is our celebration. And there's good reasons for having a large celebration of the Epiphany. The word what we celebrate is that God has appeared to us. God has appeared, and not just to Abraham and his descendants, the Jews, but God has appeared to all peoples of all nations, of all languages. And our readings today show us two responses when we recognize that God has appeared. We see one response in the Magi, who prostrated themselves before the Lord. They came to they put themselves at the Lord's service. They put the Lord clearly above themselves. The other response was the response of King Herod, who saw this appearance, this great gift. He saw it only as a threat. And there's a third response that's more common, that's not in our readings, but it's very common today, and I'll get to that later. But the word Epiphany means appearance. God has appeared. And in our Christian tradition, they recognize actually three events that happened on January, that they attribute to the day January 6th. The first is the one that we heard about in our readings. The star appeared in the east. The star is something that can be seen by everyone. It can be seen across the world. It's something physical, part of our physical world, that proclaims that God has come among us. The second event that they celebrate on this day is that this is the day that they celebrate the changing of water into wine. In John's Gospel, he speaks of the first sign that Jesus performed at Cana, that in that miracle, water changed into wine. Again, something that's part of our physical world, a change that's brought about so that we might recognize God has appeared to us. And a third event that we'll celebrate next Sunday is the baptism of the Lord. That in the baptism of the Lord, the voice of the Father was heard saying, "This is my Son with whom I am well pleased." And the Spirit descended in bodily form as a dove, something that could be witnessed by those who were around. God has appeared in our midst. That's what it means for Jesus to be among us. God has appeared to us, and that's a tremendous, tremendous gift. You know, God made himself known to Abraham, and that was the beginning of that walk of faith. He's our father in faith. But now with the Epiphany, what we celebrate at the Epiphany, the Magi who came, they weren't Jewish people. They were from, present-day Persia or Iran. They were the Gentiles. But they too had seen that God had appeared. He came not to some, but to all. And this appearance of God is still seen today, primarily in preaching, in the preaching of the gospel and in the testimony of the scriptures. But it can also be seen in the miracles, the healings that happen at Lourdes, the healings that happen as saints come to be canonized. Those are things that are scrutinized by scientists and doctors in Rome. These are signs that God has appeared to us and is among us to save us. So first, God has appeared. And then we see the response of the Magi. The Magi came and did him homage. They brought him gifts. They prostrated themselves before the Lord. We want that to be a pattern for our own response. Recognizing God in our midst, we want to also to prostrate ourselves. That's what the act of worship is. It's bringing ourselves into the presence of the Holy One, bringing ourselves into the presence of the divine, and saying, "You're God and I am not." That's worship. That's homage. That's what we see in the Magi. And it's not my will that's most important, but rather it's placing myself as a servant of the God who is love and the God who has appeared to us. So that's a response that we want to imitate. But that's not the only response when God appears. The Magi recognized it as a gift, and they responded with gifts of their own. God also appeared to King Herod. He too was made aware of the star. He too was made aware that a king was born. But Herod did not. Despite what he said to the Magi, Herod did not intend to do him homage. Rather, Herod's response was to enthrone his own will. was to enthrone his own will, to put in the first place his own quest for power and retaining power. And in service of holding on to the power that he had, the political power that he had, he was even willing to lie to the Magi, to say, I want to do homage to this child too, when in fact he wanted to kill the child as a threat. And he ordered the death of any child in Bethlehem under the age of 2, because he saw only a threat. God had appeared, he didn't see a gift. He saw a threat because he wanted to enthrone his own will and his own quest for power. That does ring very true today. There are many people today who would seek at all costs to gain power or to retain power, and even to tell lies to retain that power. Do not imitate Herod. Do not respond to God's appearance in that way. And again, learn from the Magi. We're told the Magi were warned in a dream, and they departed by another road. Herod was seeking power, and so they fled from him. They departed by another way. We want to learn from that. When we recognize someone who's saw a movement or a cause or a person or a group who's bent on obtaining power and retaining power, flee. Have nothing to do with it. Do not be in their company, in their midst. Depart by another way. And there's a third response. Truly God has appeared to us. We see it in the star. We see it in Jesus' miracle of the water into the wine. We see it in the testimony of the voice of the Father at Jesus' baptism. We see it today in the preaching of the gospel. We see it today in the witness of Christian lives lived in holiness and service. We see it today in the testimony of the Scriptures. The third response, that's perhaps the most common today and the most dangerous, is one of indifference and blindness. To simply act as if God is not here. To act as if God has not appeared. And that's very common today. In fact, that's why there are so few of us here. Because so many have become indifferent that God has appeared and come in our midst. And there are many factors for that. I can't go into them all today, but part of it is a sense of an individualism. And it's somewhat related to that, seeking our own will. Part of it is that we're taught part of it is a flattening of the human person, where they don't really talk about the spiritual soul. They don't talk about pursuing goodness as good for goodness' sake, or they don't talk about pursuing goodness or truth or any objective beauty. And so they're reduced instead to just seeking comforts, physical comforts. Or they're reduced to just seeking, what's efficient or what's useful. That's a flattening of the human person. And it results to an indifference or a blindness when God appears in our midst. We're here to celebrate that God has appeared to us. The Magi has seen his star. We have seen him among us in the sacraments. We have seen him among us in the preaching of the gospel. We come now before the altar to do him homage, to learn from the response of the Magi, to do him homage, that others might recognize through our witness, through our homage, through our letting go of our own will, that yes, God has appeared.